If you haven't flown in the last few months, the airport you remember doesn't exist anymore. The ID that got you through security last year might get you turned away at the checkpoint next time. A rule that airline employees have followed for almost 2 decades quietly disappeared. And several major airlines have rewritten their baggage policies so fast that even frequent flyers are getting blindsided by fees they never budgeted for. None of this happened overnight, and that's exactly the problem. Because it rolled out in pieces, most travelers are only finding out about each change the hard way, standing at the checkpoint or the gate counter. We're going through every rule that's now fully in effect, the ones a lot of people still don't know about, and the one buried near the end that could cost you $45 before you even reach the gate. Let's start with the rule that changed who's even allowed to board the plane. Rule 1. Real ID is no longer optional. For years, Real ID was one of those government deadlines everyone assumed would get pushed back again. It had been delayed multiple times since Congress first passed the Real ID Act back in 2005. Then, on May 7, 2025, the delays finally ran out. Since that date, every traveler 18 or older has needed a Real ID-compliant driver's license, or another TSA-accepted form of identification, like a valid passport or passport card, just to get through a domestic security checkpoint. You can spot a compliant license by a small star marker, usually gold or black, printed in the corner. If your license doesn't have that star, it simply won't work at the checkpoint anymore, no matter how valid it is for driving. Here's the part that catches people off guard. This isn't a TSA suggestion or a recommended policy. It's federal law, tied directly to post-9/11 security standards, and there's no appeals process at the checkpoint itself. TSA officers aren't authorized to wave you through out of sympathy or convenience. If your ID isn't compliant and you don't have an accepted alternative, you don't fly, at least not without what we're about to cover next. There are a few carve-outs worth knowing. Active duty military and Department of Defense ID holders get an exception, and kids flying domestically with an adult still don't need ID at all. Some states have also started rolling out mobile driver's licenses, digital ID apps tied to a Real ID on file, and a growing number of airports now accept them, though only if your state actually participates in the program. Unaccompanied minors enrolled in TSA PreCheck are a notable exception too. Even without an adult present, they're still expected to show acceptable ID. And here's a detail that trips people up constantly. TSA PreCheck itself doesn't replace this requirement at all. PreCheck speeds up how you're screened, not whether you need valid identification in the first place. People assume paying for expedited screening means they've covered every base, and then they're standing at the checkpoint confused about why their outdated license still isn't working. For the average adult traveler, Real ID is now simply the price of admission to fly. And what happens if you show up without one? That's where things get expensive. Rule 2. Forgetting your ID now comes with a $45 price tag. Most people assume forgetting their license just means a longer wait in line. That used to be closer to true. Not anymore. Starting February 1, 2026, TSA rolled out something called the ConfirmID program. If you arrive at a checkpoint without a Real ID-compliant license or another approved document, you can still get through security, but now it'll cost you $45, non-refundable, on the spot. That fee covers TSA verifying your identity through an alternative process, typically involving additional questions and a biometric check, and it's valid for 10 days, meaning you'd have to pay again if you're flying without proper ID beyond that window. To put that in perspective, this fee replaced an earlier, cheaper $18 charge that TSA had quietly introduced in late 2025, before more than doubling it just a few months later. That's a fast escalation, and it signals TSA sees this less as a courtesy fee and more as a real deterrent. Families traveling together should pay close attention here too. If multiple adults in your group are caught without compliant ID, that $45 charge applies per person, which can turn a simple mix-up into a genuinely expensive mistake before you've even reached your gate. It's easy to imagine how this plays out in real life. A family of 4 heading out for a vacation. Nobody double-checked grandma's license before the trip, and suddenly what should have been a routine departure turns into a $45 surprise charge and a much longer wait while identity verification happens. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Check your license for that star well before your trip, and if it's missing, a visit to the DMV solves the entire problem permanently, usually well before your next flight if you don't wait until the week of departure. But TSA's not just changing who gets through the checkpoint, they've also changed how you get screened once you're there. Rule 3. You can finally keep your shoes on. Here's a change that surprised even longtime TSA officers. On July 8, 2025, the Department of Homeland Security ended the mandatory shoe removal rule that had defined airport security since 2006, when it was introduced following a failed shoe bomb attempt. For nearly 20 years, taking off your shoes at security was as automatic as showing your boarding pass. Now, for most travelers at most checkpoints, that step is gone. TSA officers retain the discretion to ask individual travelers to remove their shoes if something about the screening flags a concern, so it's not a guarantee in every single case, but for the overwhelming majority of flyers, this is one less bottleneck in an already stressful line. Why did this change happen after 2 decades? Newer scanning technology plays a big role, and it connects directly to the next rule on this list, which is quietly transforming what security screening even looks like. There's also a political dimension worth mentioning. The change came directly from the Department of Homeland Security under new leadership, and officials have framed it as part of a broader push to modernize what many travelers had long criticized as outdated, inconvenient security theater rather than genuinely effective screening. But there's a psychological layer here too. Travelers who've spent years bracing for the shoes off, laptop out, liquids separated routine sometimes still do it out of habit, slowing down lines unnecessarily even when nobody asked them to. If you haven't flown recently, this is one habit worth breaking, because standing there peeling off your sneakers at a checkpoint that no longer requires it isn't helping anyone move faster. It's just adding friction to a line that's finally moving quicker than it has in years. Rule 4. The machines watching your bag have changed. This next shift barely gets talked about, but it's arguably the most consequential upgrade to airport security in years. TSA has been steadily installing computed tomography scanners, the same 3D imaging technology used in hospital CT scans, at checkpoints across the country. Unlike older X-ray machines that produce a flat, two-dimensional image, these scanners rotate around your carry-on bag and build a rotating 3D model that officers can examine from every angle. That means at airports equipped with this technology, you typically no longer need to pull your laptop out of your bag, and in many cases, liquids can stay packed too, since the scanner can distinguish container contents with far more precision than older equipment ever could. Here's the catch, and it's an important one. This technology isn't everywhere yet. It's concentrated at major hub airports, places like Atlanta, JFK, and LAX, with more airports expected to receive the upgrade as the rollout continues throughout the year. If you're flying out of a smaller regional airport, you may still be asked to remove electronics and liquids the old-fashioned way, and showing up expecting the streamlined process only to be told to unpack everything can feel like a step backward if you weren't prepared for the difference. The smart move is checking what technology your specific departure airport uses before you assume the new rules apply everywhere, because getting caught off guard at an older checkpoint can eat up time you didn't plan for, especially if you're cutting it close before boarding. This is one of those changes that rewards travelers who do a little homework and quietly punishes the ones who assume every airport works identically. And speaking of liquids, TSA just carved out some genuinely useful exceptions to a rule that's frustrated travelers for nearly 2 decades. Rule 5. The liquid rule finally has exceptions. Ask any frequent flyer about the 3.11 liquid rule and you'll probably get an eye roll. Containers under 3.4 ounces, packed in a single quart bag. For years, it didn't matter what the liquid actually was. Baby formula, medication, even some snacks got needlessly hassled at checkpoints. That's shifted. TSA has expanded its list of exempted items that don't have to follow the standard 3.11 restrictions, covering categories like medically necessary liquids, baby formula, and food for young children, and certain other essential items travelers carry for medical or dietary reasons. If you're flying with a family, managing medication, or dealing with dietary restrictions, this is genuinely good news. It means less unpacking, less explaining yourself to an officer, and less risk of having something confiscated that you actually needed. The trade-off is that these exemptions aren't universally applied yet, tying back to that same uneven rollout of newer screening technology. An officer at one airport may recognize an exemption instantly. Another might ask more questions simply because their checkpoint hasn't been updated. The safest strategy is still to declare medically necessary liquids up front, rather than assuming an officer will automatically recognize the exemption. A 30-second heads-up at the start of screening beats a 5-minute conversation in the middle of it. Security rules are one thing, though. What airlines are doing to your wallet once you're through that checkpoint is an entirely different story. Rule 6. Carry-on enforcement is getting serious. For years, airlines published carry-on size limits and then quietly looked the other way as bags visibly too large rolled right down the jet bridge. That era of loose enforcement is fading fast. More airlines have started using sizing checks directly at the gate right before boarding, rather than relying only on the bins near check-in that travelers could easily avoid. If your bag doesn't fit the template, you're now far more likely to get flagged in front of the entire boarding line and hit with a surcharge on the spot, rather than sliding through unnoticed like you might have a couple of years ago. Airlines determine their own size and weight limits rather than TSA, which means the exact dimensions differ from carrier to carrier. Southwest has historically allowed slightly larger bags than most competitors, for instance, which makes assuming my bag worked on my last flight a genuinely risky habit if you're switching airlines for your next trip. This shift lines up with the broader baggage fee trend we're about to get into. Airlines have realized that a bag squeezing through as a carry-on for free is revenue they're not collecting, and gate agents are being trained and incentivized accordingly, since every oversized bag caught and charged adds up across thousands of flights a day. Frequent flyers who've relied on the same slightly oversized rolling bag for years are the ones most likely to get caught off guard here, simply because it worked fine on their last dozen flights and they've stopped questioning it. The fix here is almost too simple. Measure your actual bag against your specific airline's published dimensions before you leave home, not after you're already standing at the gate with a line building up behind you and a flight attendant waiting for an answer. Rule 7. Southwest just abandoned its signature policy. For nearly 50 years, Southwest Airlines built its entire identity around one thing: no assigned seats, first come, first served, race to your favorite row. That era is officially over. Beginning January 27, 2026, Southwest transitioned to assigned seating with numbered boarding groups, functionally becoming just like every other major U.S. carrier. For loyal Southwest flyers, this wasn't a minor tweak. It was the end of a boarding culture that shaped how millions of people planned their trips, from showing up early to secure a good spot in line to the entire strategy behind Southwest's famously chaotic but beloved boarding process. Even more surprising is what came with it. Southwest also introduced a new policy requiring passengers who can't comfortably fit into a single seat to purchase a second seat at full price, a significant shift from the airline's previous, more flexible approach to this exact situation. Combined with the death of assigned seating free boarding, this represents one of the biggest cultural shifts in the history of a major U.S. airline. What's driving it isn't a mystery. Southwest has faced years of financial pressure, and an activist investor took a meaningful stake in the company, pushing leadership toward practices already standard at competitors like Delta, American, and United. For an airline that spent half a century marketing itself as the fun, quirky alternative to buttoned-up legacy carriers, adopting the exact playbook it used to poke fun at is a genuinely notable shift, and longtime loyal customers have voiced real frustration about losing what made the airline distinct in the first place. If you've flown Southwest before and assumed you know how it works, you don't anymore, and that's just the beginning of how much airlines have changed their approach to your wallet. Rule 8. Bags are getting more expensive almost everywhere. If checking a bag felt like it cost more this year than last year, you weren't imagining it. Multiple major airlines have raised baggage fees within the same 12-month stretch, and the increases aren't small. American Airlines changed its second bag pricing structure starting February 18, 2026. Pay online in advance, and a second checked bag runs $45, but wait until you're at the airport and that same bag now costs $50, a new $5 penalty specifically for not planning ahead. JetBlue followed a similar path in March 2026, raising its first checked bag fee from around $39 to $49, citing rising fuel and operating costs as the driving factor. And Southwest, the airline that spent decades marketing bags fly free as a core part of its brand, has been phasing that policy out entirely, ending free checked bags for most passengers after years of framing it as untouchable. The pattern across all of these changes is consistent. Airlines are pushing harder toward what the industry calls ancillary revenue, meaning the base ticket price increasingly represents just a fraction of what a trip actually costs once bags, seat selection, and other add-ons get factored in. It's worth remembering that federal rules already require airlines to disclose these fees upfront during booking, rather than hiding them until checkout, a protection that came from earlier Department of Transportation rulemaking, specifically because regulators found baggage fee revenue growing far faster than airlines' overall operating revenue. That disclosure requirement doesn't stop the fees from rising. It just means you're less likely to be blindsided if you actually read the fine print before you click purchase. The financial pressure driving this, fuel costs, investor demands, post-pandemic profit margins, isn't going away anytime soon, which means further increases across the industry wouldn't be surprising. The smartest move for any traveler right now is treating baggage fees as a line item to check before booking, the same way you'd compare seat pitch or layover times, rather than an afterthought to deal with once you're already standing at the counter with your bag on the scale. But not every new policy this year has been about extracting more money. One program is actually designed to make the airport experience easier for a specific group of travelers. Rule 9. A new way to bring non-flying family through security. Anyone who's ever said goodbye to a nervous first-time flyer or watched an elderly parent navigate a connection alone knows the frustration of being stopped at the checkpoint. TSA is now piloting a solution. The new Airport Guest Pass program allows non-ticketed individuals to accompany a traveler through security and all the way to the gate, rather than saying goodbye at the checkpoint entrance. It's currently being tested at a handful of airports, including San Diego, Seattle, Orlando, Philadelphia, and San Francisco, with guests needing to apply in advance and receive a digital pass by email before their visit. This is one of the more genuinely traveler-friendly changes on this entire list, especially for families dropping off young children flying alone, or for anyone assisting a parent who needs extra support getting to their gate. It's still in a limited pilot phase, so don't count on it being available at your specific airport just yet. But if the test goes well, expect a wider rollout to follow. It's a reminder that not every new airport policy in 2026 is about tightening restrictions or adding fees. Some are actually designed to reduce the stress that's built into flying with people who need extra help. Still, even with a helpful change like this one, the overall trend at airports right now points in one clear direction. Rule 10. Getting bumped now pays a lot more. Here's one piece of good news buried in all of this, and it only applies if things go wrong, but when they do, it matters a lot more than it used to. Federal regulators have significantly raised the compensation airlines owe passengers who get involuntarily bumped from an oversold flight. Under the older rules, bumped passengers could receive up to $400 or $800 depending on how long they were delayed before catching a replacement flight. Those caps have since been raised to $650 and $1,330, a substantial jump that changes the math for both passengers and airlines. On top of that, the rules expanded the tarmac delay protections that already existed for domestic flights to also cover international flights, preventing passengers from being stranded on the tarmac for more than 4 hours without the option to deplane. Airlines still don't bump passengers often. It affects a small fraction of travelers each year. But when a flight is oversold and the gate agent starts asking for volunteers, these higher compensation limits give passengers real leverage to negotiate a better deal for giving up their seat voluntarily. If you've got a flexible schedule and no urgent reason to land on time, this is one of the rare moments where a rule change actually works in the traveler's favor instead of against it. What this all means for your next trip: step back and look at these changes together, and a pattern emerges. Identification requirements are stricter and now carry real financial consequences if you're unprepared. Security screening is getting faster and less invasive at upgraded checkpoints, but wildly inconsistent depending on which airport you're flying through. And airlines are steadily shifting more of the true cost of flying away from the advertised ticket price and onto fees you only discover once you're already committed to the trip. None of these changes are optional or avoidable by simply not paying attention. They apply whether you've heard about them or not. The travelers who show up prepared, with a real ID-compliant license in hand and a clear understanding of their airline's current baggage and carry-on policy, are going to have a dramatically smoother experience than those who assume the airport works the same way it did even a year ago. It's worth saying plainly, none of these rules exist to make flying harder for its own sake. Identity verification closes real security gaps. Updated scanning technology genuinely speeds up lines at the airports that have it. Even the fee increases, frustrating as they are, reflect real cost pressures airlines are facing industry-wide. But understanding the reasoning behind a rule doesn't make it any less important to prepare for it. And the gap between travelers who know what's changed and those who don't is only going to widen as more of these updates roll out. A few minutes of preparation before you leave the house, checking your ID, checking your airline's current fee structure, checking what screening technology your departure airport uses, can be the difference between a routine trip and a stressful, expensive scramble at the counter. Which of these changes caught you most off guard? And is there another new airport rule you think travelers need to know about before their next flight?